Welcome back in the Lions247 Podcast. I am Tyler Donohue. He is Sean Fitz. It's the Monday after the Super Bowl. So college football, NFL, all done now. We're looking toward the 2022 kickoffs next September. Sean, fun game, one that kept you watching to the end. You can't say that for every Super Bowl unless you gamble, and then you can. But big news here was two more champions out of the Penn State football program. And also the other news is you're wearing a jersey. Is it a Commanders jersey? You're celebrating the day that everyone goes back to 0-0. Really a banner day on the calendar year as a Washington fan.
As a Commanders fan, this is all you can hope for. Everybody's the same. Draft is coming up. So, and also I don't need the judgment in your voice when you mention gambling on the Super Bowl. So other than that, yes, it's the reset. We got a couple of weeks until spring ball starts. Penn State's spring break, by the way, I believe the 6th through the 10th-ish area in March, and then they'll start after that when they get back, and then the blue-white game. So we've got a little bit of downtime here until we get actual football back. But we always like that time to rest and recuperate and talk about things like Penn State's new Super Bowl champions, Nick Scott and Grant Haley. Tremendously happy for those guys. As I mentioned at the end of the last episode, two great kids, two great representatives for them. And also throw Troy Reeder in there, who was at Penn State for a short time. He gets a Super Bowl ring now. So really, really happy for those guys.
And you talked about this as well, Haley dealing with tragedy. I mean, we talked about it a lot with his parents and the emotional stuff that has gone on with his family over the past few years. And this year, losing his father, he had a pretty emotional tribute to his dad late last night, I saw on Twitter. Super Bowl champions and did a little bit of follow through and just checking on that list of colleges producing Super Bowl champions. And Penn State leads all Big Ten programs. They're behind only Southern Cal. 46 champions now. That does include Chris Hogan. I know a lot of people don't like that, so I'll mention it as a caveat. Former lacrosse player here at the Nittany Lions, and then went on and played football for Monmouth, won a couple Super Bowls. But that makes 7 consecutive years now where a former Penn State athlete has won a Super Bowl. Last couple of years, 5 combined, which you like to see your guys earn rings, and a couple here that both signed with Franklin's first class at Penn State back in 2014. Scott as a running back, Haley burned red shirt and played 4 years and was off to the NFL and kind of took that journeyman's path to this point. And I was talking to somebody else yesterday about Nick Scott, who ended up stepping up as a starter for the postseason run for the Rams due to an injury. And he was more of a special teams and valued backup kind of guy. You put together a bit of a run like that, and unfortunately he was on the wrong end of a touchdown in the Super Bowl, and you never want to get caught up in those kind of images. But Nick Scott's Super Bowl champ. He played a lot of football. I don't think he missed a snap, at least in the postseason going into the Super Bowl, and made himself some money, I'd imagine. It's exciting to see because the guy who entered the league as a 7th-round pick, he was the 6th player selected out of Penn State in that 2019 NFL draft. I don't know if it'll be the Rams or it'll be with somebody else, but his value just went up. And Grant Haley, you can only hope for him that maybe it pauses calms his NFL career a little bit, because when you're going practice squad to practice squad, the Giants, the Saints, the Rams, and now he's a champ. You hope for Haley, maybe this can be more of a calmer year ahead in his NFL career. Maybe he's found a new home, but the offseason will sort itself out. For now, I hope these guys can take some time and bask in the moment.
Yeah, and no more ring chasing for those guys. They got that one out of the way. I mean, it's the highest point in your career. But yeah, hopefully the paychecks keep coming for those guys. And I mentioned Reeder a little bit earlier. Not a ton of like animosity or anything. I know some Penn State fans kind of in the spot that he left them in at linebacker, which was not great. But this wasn't a transfer that was like bitter or anything like that. He went to James Franklin. I think it was after the Tax Slayer Bowl. He went to Franklin and said, "Hey, I want to go home." His brother was about to play for Delaware. He wanted Penn State to recruit his brother, but his brother wasn't a Penn State level prospect. Wanted to go home. His dad was a big name there at Delaware as well. And he's like, I'm not going to Clemson. I'm not going to Ohio State. I just want to go home and play. And he completed his career at Delaware. And then the irony there is he was homesick, and Penn State's not, you don't get much closer than Penn State to Northeast Delaware. But he's in Los Angeles now, which is kind of the humorous part, but he's getting paid for it. So I'm sure that has something, that's a little bit different, make him deal with the homesickness a little bit better, but happy for all those guys. They've always been, really great to deal with, especially Nick. who, I didn't think was a guy that was going to stick in the NFL. You just wasn't sure what his position was. Was he polished enough as a safety, but made it work through special teams, which is a great lesson for anybody that's a prospect coming up and trying to make it, because special teams, coaches just love to fixate on special teams, and that's something where you can earn a roster spot or a scholarship or whatever have you. And Nick Scott, the embodiment of one of those guys that made it happen.
Yeah, before Nick Scott was a starting safety for the Nittany Lions, he was a special teams captain for this Penn State program. And I was able to hop on a call with him. I texted you and Mark on Thursday night after being part of that Super Bowl Zoom call with Nick Scott. And same guy that we were talking to 3, 4, 5 years ago before Penn State games. Few times people wanted to talk about the interception off Tom Brady in round 2 of the playoffs. That was Brady's last interception as an NFL quarterback. And both times Nick Scott says, happy to talk about the game ahead of us, not really focused on looking back. Super Bowl questions go all over the place, but this guy was the 1-0 mentality to a T. I'm not surprised with Nick Scott. And again, we'll see what the offseason lies ahead. Guys don't stick around in one spot for a long time, but on this roster at the right moment and obviously contributed in a big way. Grant Haley got a lot of special teams work in the postseason. So one final congrats to those guys, and 5 Super Bowl champions out of Penn State in the last 13 months. That certainly is something that James Franklin will be happy to point out as often as possible. And Sean, there's not a ton going on right now in terms of team news. We caught up a bit last week about the start of winter workouts and some early standouts that the coaching staff had pointed to, and some early storylines, some under the radar guys that we had talked about. We'll keep monitoring those things. I know that you're tapped into some conversations about what's happening right now as these guys are starting to emerge and evolve on this roster and show what they're about over this stretch of the calendar season. But you also posted your big board at the end of last week after our most recent episode. It's something that I know many of our readers on the message board were clamoring for. 25 names on there for the 2023 class, each of them uncommitted, each of them in some way, shape, or form valued by this Nittany Lions staff. And you set out to kind of go through the order of that value from Penn State's perspective, and additionally, the realistic scenario that a prospect is going to reciprocate that interest.
Yeah, it's not easy because it changes so often. I changed it just before publishing it, just to move up a couple guys up or down. You talk to certain people, say, maybe not pushing as hard as this guy, maybe going a little bit after this guy, maybe this is a guy that we think is a diamond in the rough type thing. So all over the place right there. And if you look at the buildup of the class, I mean, it's not it's not a surprise that some of the spots sticking out. Linebacker, obviously a big spot for Penn State, and defensive line is still something that they need to address in this class, particularly in the interior. So I think it's kind of all over defense. You take a look at the class so far. You've got all those offensive linemen in there. You got 14 tight ends or whatever you have right now. So you're kind of focused on a couple of spots. I think some of the positions that have moved, I don't want to say to the back burner because they're always recruiting these guys and they're always going after them, but running back is still very much up in the air. Of course, Trayon Webb is a guy that we're watching in Florida, but he's not near a decision or anything like that. This is one where it's probably kind of like that cycle with Keziah Holmes and Kevon Lee, where it's probably not going to come into focus until the spring or the summer, till the official visits start racking up and things like that, because it's probably going to be somebody from out of the region. London Montgomery was in, this Scranton Prep running back who's really, really good, was in for a visit a couple of weeks ago, but it's looking like the focus is going to be trying to wait it out, see if you can get some of those out of region guys on campus and see what happens. Kind of the same with cornerback. And I know that's not really been something that we've talked about all that much on here, but not a ton of guys in the region that are, bona fide cornerbacks. A lot of guys that coming out of the COVID evaluation cycle, a lot of guys that started out as cornerbacks might turn into safeties, might even turn into linebacker. You look at a guy like Antonio Cotman down in Virginia, who's a really, really big bodied kid. Can he turn and run? Can he, does he have the hips? Does he have the back pedal? All that kind of stuff to be a cornerback. You still have questions about that. So I think corner and running back are two positions that are kind of slower developing. Still an offensive lineman. We'll get to a question here in one of the mailbag questions here in a little bit. Still an offensive lineman, but I think defensive line is big. Quarterback, obviously always big. How's that going to play out after signing Drew Allar and Bo Prabula in the last cycle? There's just there's a lot of questions. I know Penn State's off to a very fast start and doing very well, but just a lot of questions at a couple of positions, quarterback, running back, corner being them, a lot of receivers on the board, a lot of linebackers on the board. So feeling pretty good there. But yeah, the big board it's apt to change. I mean, I looked at the one that I posted it around this time last year, and obviously evaluations were different with the COVID year and you didn't have guys on campus, but I posted 20 names. And by the time 7 of those guys made decisions, I think it was, Penn State wasn't even pursuing. So a lot can change in the next couple of months. You've got camps coming up. You've got the camp cycle in the spring coming up where, we talk about the Under Armour camps and the Nike camps and everything like that, and say, shorts and t-shirts and everything like that. That's also an evaluation point for the staff and for every college staff that's out there. So interesting times coming up. We'll see how that looks a month from now. We'll see how it looks 6 months from now, because there's going to be guys on that board that fall away. There's going to be guys that, aren't even close to that board right now that end up popping up on official visits in June. So it's a fun time of year to throw it up. Penn State's off to a hot start in 2023, but there's still plenty of work to do.
It's the first time in 3 years, Sean, that we're approaching March where you're looking ahead at a full offseason format of recruiting structure that you and I and everyone who follows this and works in this industry has understood. That has been not the case for the last 2 years. So it's a great thing for the prospects. It should certainly be helpful for continuing to work on this board. And one thing I took note of here is, I don't think it's any surprise at this point or any secret at this point, Virginia, a lot of potential there for Penn State. But here in Pennsylvania on the 2023 recruiting trail, I mean, James Franklin referenced it on signing day. A big reason why he felt like that class was so successful was because they took care of business on home turf, and it was a good year for home turf recruiting. It's not always a great year to recruit in the state of Pennsylvania. Certainly some names popping up here on the higher side of your list. What's your early read, acknowledging full well that we've got key camps coming up, key recruiting visits coming up, where this coaching staff's going to get a chance to really evaluate these players, but where things stand in mid-February through junior seasons? What do you think about this 2023 class in the state of Pennsylvania?
Yeah, I mean, it's back on the upswing. Last year, I think it was probably a little bit better. You had some high-end talent there, but it's back on the upswing. You've got guys that, Javen Williams was a big get for Penn State. He's, I think, the number 2 prospect in the composite there among those rankings. But Tamir Robinson's obviously a big one there. Phil Picciotti. There are guys on there that, you look at what Penn State's done in the state. There's 19 offers out. It used to be, if you had an offer in state, that was a good offer. You were good to commit or anything like that. Penn State kind of changed course in the last year and a half, maybe 2 years, where, you were probably that was more of an evaluation chip than anything. So you've got 19 offers in this class in state, and it's not really the situation where they're going to be able to move on all 19 guys. I think I had 5 guys from Pennsylvania on that big board. Of course, they've already got a couple of guys in the boat, in the 2023 class, and then one in the 2024 class. So I think things are a little bit stronger. That 19 number is a little bit misleading, but there's some solid prospect. I mean, we went through a couple of years where, you were offering 4 and 5 guys in state. And, that's something that they've changed. And I think they've gotten a little bit more interest from the other side as a result of being able to throw out those offers earlier and sort of getting in the way everybody else was getting in. I mean, it's very easy. You look at how many kids Penn State has offered in like Florida. I mean, it's very easy to throw those things out like candy and try and come around and eventually pick and choose which ones you guys want to get on campus and which ones, you might eventually actually offer or actually take. They got 70 offers in Florida right now. Obviously, they're not taking 70 kids from Florida. So I think when you do that in state, you sort of balance where you're at versus where you want to be with those guys. So a guy like Jameel Lyons is a very interesting case because he was a guy that they offered after camp, was very good in camp last year. I think I think he's eventually an interior prospect, 6'4", 240, something like that. He's going to continue to grow. He camped very well. He performed very well. grades weren't great, still can offer him, because that's a bridge that you can cross later. And you'll see that with different evaluations. You'll see that with game film. You'll see that with grades, with athleticism, testing numbers, and things like that. Is you can always cool on a prospect. And I know it sounds cold-hearted to do that, but you can always go the other direction. This is a situation where you can throw that offer out and you keep him interested, keep him getting to campus. He came to campus in January. He came for a game, and now all of a sudden those things improve with like academics in this case. Then all of a sudden you're in a pretty good spot to turn that corner if you want to turn that corner with the prospect. So I think it's the smart approach. I don't know, is it the most upfront and way to go? Not necessarily, but from speaking to people in like specifically the Philadelphia area, it's a bigger deal to not offer the prospect than it is to offer that prospect and then not take that prospect.
I did a quick look back at that 2019 Pennsylvania class, because that one particularly I remember being very scant on the Penn State offer sheet.
Yeah.
It was Keaton Ellis got an offer, Joey Porter Jr., Daquan Hardy got an offer the day before the February signing day. Andre White, the linebacker out of Harrisburg, who ended up at A&M, got the offer. And there's some of the other names on here that didn't end up landing on that target list and weren't heavily pursued. Andrew Kristofic. I'm trying to look through here. You had Ishim Young resurface. You had Patrick Garwo, the running back, who ended up at Boston College. MJ Devonshire, Hayden Rucci, so a lot of these names that were near the top of the list, they didn't necessarily get that Penn State offer early, late, at any stage. And now you're talking about a recruiting cycle that still has essentially a full year ahead of it, where you've got 15 plus offers out in the state. So, I mean, that's a stark difference. Obviously, class by class, the talent level will be different, but clearly the approach has evolved for Penn State. And looking here at Sean at the 2023 rankings, in our 24/7 sports rankings, at least, out of the top 20 players in the state of Pennsylvania for 2023, 3 have committed. All 3 of them have committed to Penn State.
Yeah, doing well. If you look at that 2020 class, it's probably even a better example, because you had Julian Fleming, Michael Carmody, Nick Dawkins, Zariah Fisher, Dayon Hayes, Fatorma Mulba, and Tyler Elsden. Just 7 offers in state, but Penn State pursued all those guys, would have taken all those guys when they made decisions. So that's a little bit different in the last couple of cycles. But, you're kind of playing the politics game there with, coaches, trainers, or whomever it may be, to set yourself up to potentially take, I don't want to say take who you want, because that's not an accurate depiction, but put yourself in position to actually land some guys instead of, dealing with, I mean, they dealt with the Ishim Young. Don and I have talked about this before. They talked about, they've dealt with the Ishim Young fallout in Philly for a couple of years. Penn State couldn't touch that kid after everything that happened, obviously. Not going to rehash that, but there was still some hurt souls, some bitter souls on the other side of that, and that hurt them for a couple of years. So now you can get out there, you can evaluate more, you can offer more, and you can just basically do it the way everyone else does, and there's nothing wrong with that.
The other spot I just wanted to mention here is quarterback, and we have talked about this at some point in the last month, but your recruiting strategy at quarterback and the mindset of the recruit that's going to choose you can be different. You're going to have Mike Yursich as the main man in that. You're going to have James Franklin involved in that dialogue, but it's a very different scenario in what this recruit will be following to campus versus what you talked about with Drew Aller and Bo Perbula, of course, last recruiting cycle. And I think that's probably reflected pretty well on your list, because you've got to be realistic about what is that conversation like. There's been some new offers that have gone out at quarterback. Stokes down in Florida, it looks like that classic post-Yursich offer rise situation right now that we saw play out last winter with a couple guys. But I think that's an important thing to note here on the target board, because people are always looking for where's the QB, where's the next big QB. You'd love to stack up those 5 stars, but man, is that a tough thing to do. And I think there's maybe 2-3 programs at most that are doing anything remotely close to that in college football these days.
Yeah, and you're still evaluating. I mean, Drew didn't pick up his Penn State offer until January 30th of last year. So you can still find, 5-star kids if you wish. You can still find pretty good prospects that are out there. They're still undiscovered. And that's just it might be a tape thing. It might be a guy, in last year's case didn't camp because they couldn't camp, because they didn't have camps. And, there's a lot of different things working into evaluations, and evaluations are always changing. I mean, there are guys that, like I said, that are on the big board right now that Penn State may end up choosing not to pursue, and other schools may choose to pursue harder or not pursue them at all. So Very, very interesting time in the recruiting cycle, just based on an evaluation standpoint, because you're trying to get to, in February and March, those camps will ramp up down in Florida, and then as the weather warms up, they'll start to head north. I think the Elite 11 this year is in late April or something like that in DC, or early May in DC, and there's an Under Armour camp in Baltimore in late April, I believe it is, or early April. So there's a lot going on, and you're kind of I don't want to say treading water at this point, but you're trying to catch all the moving pieces because guys move up the board and guys move down the board.
Yeah, unlike the last couple of cycles, there'll be less room for guys to I guess point to the last season's tape as that's a reason for staying high in the rankings, and there'll be more opportunities for those camp risers who show up and kind of obliterate the competition and turn everybody's head and get a bunch of offers. Missed that a lot from the recruiting calendar the last couple of years. Hopefully that's a big part of the next few months as we cover Penn State's target board. Sean, those 25 names available for our VIP subscribers, gave some of the details there, but never give away the whole thing when it's behind that paywall. So head on over to Lions247 for that complete list that Sean put together last week, 25 names to know and ordered them as well for that 2023 Penn State Big Board. We've got a big mailbag to get to because, quite frankly, the last few days we looked at the content that we were talking about. We thought we could lean on the audience for this episode. So a few mailbag questions to get to, and one leads us right into that 2023 recruiting class. And here it goes. With all the recent offensive line recruiting success, how choosy does Penn State need to be moving forward with this class in order to save room for the blue chip talent like Samson Okunlola? And what does the situation mean for someone like Antonio Tripp, who has held a Penn State crystal ball pick, I believe from Brian Doan and from yourself for some time now?
Yeah, I mean, that's a situation. Do I have one in for Tripp? I actually forgot I put that one in. Yeah, I do, don't I? So anyway, so this is a situation where you're finding yourself evaluating, and there's a hierarchy, right? There's tackles that are 6'7", Samson Okunlola, obviously beautiful, 6'6", 295. Tackles are going to be your priority pretty much every time. You're going to try and find those big bodied guys, and if you have to make them a guard eventually, that's fine. But you want to have that length. So I'm looking at guys, like Samson Okunlola, like Evan Link, whom we mentioned we really like a lot around here. I'm not sure if that's the first time we've said that or not, but Chase Basantis from New Jersey, Caden Proctor. I mean, this is the time to swing big. You got 4 offensive linemen in the boat, 4 that seem pretty safe in terms of sticking with your class. But see what you can do with Caden Proctor. He's a 5-star kid from Iowa. The chances are not high there, but at the same time, you can still, he's got a top 7. So do the math. You got 5 official visits. You got a chance to get him on campus, and
the hat is on the table, as you said last
week.
Yeah,
the hat's on the table. That's where you want to be when you turn that corner. Olas Alanin, I'm sorry, he's Finnish, and I just completely butchered that. I apologize for that. Another foreign prospect in Lucas Simmons, who's down in Clearwater, Florida. So you can keep those guys. I'm not saying keep them warm or anything like that, but you can still recruit those guys really hard. And you're going to have, like I mentioned, that hierarchy of position where offensive tackle reigns supreme. You want all the tackles that you can get. We've talked about that dozens and dozens of times. And then size is going to come into play here. The guy that you asked about, Antonio Tripp, 6'2" and change, 6'3", he's an interior prospect. Those guys don't have the same kind of value. So kind of falling down the board for some of those guys as we continue to mature through the process, as we continue to run off those dates on the calendar, the smaller you are, that's going to be a check against you. So, if you're 6'3", 200, that's good size for a lineman. You can play in the NFL at that size, but the other coaches that are recruiting you are going to, aim for the 6'6" guy, aim for the 6'5" guy, aim for the guy that has the better length. So there, you run through that hierarchy, and there's guys on the board who, were guys that we were talking about maybe last fall, like, Robert Sweeney's been up for a couple of visits so far from Texas. And, I don't want to say Sam Pendleton because I like Sam Pendleton a lot, but some of those interior prospects, Kobe Keenum's probably a good example from Alabama, about 6'4", 300. And, 6'4" is kind of the line right there. It's not a be all end all by any stretch of the imagination, but you're going to want to continue to get bigger and longer. Chase Basantis is 6'5", Okunlola is 6'6", Caden Proctor is 6'7", Evan Link is 6'6" plus. So you've got so many things working against the smaller guys, and I put that in quote because they're 300-pounders and things like that. And then, and additionally, while we're on Tripp here, Tripp is a guy that didn't get to play as a sophomore, so he came back and was kind of behind the 8 ball, kind of like we talked with Dennis Sutton, no tape out there, and it takes a while to get back into the swing of things, and just for timing in situations like that, that's really tough to deal with. So nothing against these prospects, but Penn State is recruiting very well in the offensive line right now, so they can afford to be picky. They can afford to go after these tackles and try and figure out who they want. And don't forget, you got Matthias Barnwell there as well as maybe a potential offensive lineman, probably going to look to lean to the defensive line, defensive side of the ball with him as well. So yeah, I think that's kind of how it goes with it. It's unfortunate, but you see that every year. We didn't see Malik McNeil as a big target for Penn State until later in the spring. Andre Roy was kind of the same way. But as we continue to move through the cycle, you gravitate toward those bigger guys, you gravitate toward those longer guys, because that's what's, that's where you think you can work your developmental magic.
The more selective you can be on the recruiting trail and pull that approach off, the better. And right now you got to be selective. Half of this class, 8 commits, at least half of this class, because you mentioned Barnwell is an offensive lineman. So yeah, it's going to be really pretty fascinating to see who they're able to line up for some of the official visits. I imagine a lot of those bigger names that we discussed, Proctor for one. These are guys that are going to try to lock things in April, May, June. Usually you don't necessarily see that 5-star high-level offensive lineman, last that long into his senior season. We've seen it happen before, but a lot of those things tend to take shape during the offseason. And Sean, when you kind of review this mailbag, there were a bunch more coming our way on recruiting, but I wanted to kind of shift focus a little bit with this one, and it's about some of the older players on the roster. It says there has been a lot of focus on Penn State's young talent after the recent recruiting success, but which older players do you expect to take a step forward this year? We talked about under the radar guys last week, and I think that was a lot of second, third year kind of players. Older talent, the one guy that kind of jumped into my mind here, Sean, was Nick Tarburton. He's a player that I thought, all things considered, when you kind of envisioned what his 2021 might look like, I thought he probably exceeded expectations with his, not just his availability, but his impact in certain situations. Now, he wasn't a full-time rep starter, throughout the season. He had Arnold Ebiketie, he had Jesse Luketa there. Did not have Adiza Isaac, though, of course, and those were meaningful snaps that he started to accrue. I thought he held up well. I thought he started to really be able to emerge as the kind of leader that maybe he wasn't able to become early in his Nittany Lions career, because so much of it was happening from the sideline. I think they're going to need a presence like that on the defensive front, even with PJ Mustipher coming back. I may have another name for you in a second, but he's a guy that, for me, going into year number 5 and having so much of his early Nittany Lions time be a bit of a wash, really excited for Nick Tarburton, and I'm sure the coaching staff is as well.
Yeah, and I think that you look at the roster these days, and older guys sort of carries a different meaning, because if you've been around for a couple of years and you haven't broken through in the age of the portal, you're pretty much gone. So I think that's a very interesting way to look at it. Tarburton obviously has been around and has really dealt with some injuries. Not a ton really jump out. Keaton Ellis is a really interesting one, because he's got a chance to start, because he's got a chance to, we saw some flashes early in his career. Then he made the position switch. And, we've seen guys that have made that position switch and thrived. And we've seen guys that have made that position switch and it hasn't stuck. So in terms of taking a step forward, being a breakthrough, a lot of that's going to depend on his battle with Jalen Reed at that other safety spot, who we mentioned last week, whenever it was. We always mention it. We really like Jalen Reed as a potential starter at safety there. So Keaton Ellis is going to be an interesting one. I don't think you can throw Daquan Hardy in this mix, because he is a little older, but he has been a guy that's stood out for a while. Probably a guy that you wouldn't think of in this light, but Brenton Strange. That's
exactly who I was going through next, man.
Good. I'm glad I took it from you, because there's, like I said, there's not a lot of choices out there. Brenton Strange. What a mystery he was this year. Had a couple of drops and kind of faded away. Penn State got all 3 tight ends involved and really seemed to like, especially Tyler Warren going down the stretch, getting the ball in his hands. But Brenton Strange, I think, is a good football player. I think he took a step back this year, but I think it is a guy that could probably turn things around and make some things happen. I still think there's a lot of talent in that tight end room. They haven't used them, and they haven't, on the flip side of that, they haven't really stepped up and been the guys that they wanted them to be. You remember James Franklin standing there on the field at Beaver Stadium before the game talking about how it's the best group he's ever been around, or best group in 26 years, or what have you. But they certainly didn't live up to their end of the expectations either. So I think that's a big question mark. Tight end, has talent, but are they going to utilize talent? Are those guys going to step up and be those next level guys? I know we've talked about Theo Johnson quite a bit as a potential star, but number one, you got to get him the ball. Number two, they got to make do with it. And a couple of those early drops, I think, really stuck with Strange through the year, and really kind of went away as a primary target.
One other name here. I guess there's a few because there's not many left from that 2018 class, but a couple here. I know people have been waiting for Charlie Katshir to be a name that we reference more often, that the coaching staff references more often, that is more involved in that competition. We've talked about the lack of experienced scholarship players in key areas in the linebacker room right now, and what that's going to look like and mean for spring ball and for this depth chart. He's a name out of that 2018 class. And then Jake Pinniger, still around. I know a lot of people just assumed maybe he left the program because Jordan Stout took over last year. If you were paying attention, he actually resurfaced as the place kicker for this team late in the season. Was not a good outing down in Tampa for his first field goal back in that job. But he's a guy who's going to compete against Sanders Sahadak. I guess he doesn't necessarily fit in this because I don't know if he'll take that step forward. But he's an older guy, and there's not a ton of them left that we probably should be paying attention to, because the place kicker was a bit of adventure last year for as consistent as the punting game was. And I don't think this team is going to have a margin for error in 2022, where whether it's Sahadak or it's Pinniger, you can afford an adventure, and you really shouldn't, considering what you've gotten those two guys. But Pinniger is a name that I kind of keep forgetting on the peripheral a little bit. And then I'm reminded that, well, he's here, and he could be an important component for this team. And I guess if Sahadak beats him out, then you can pretty much say, well, that's the end of Jake Pinniger here on campus. But he's a guy that, considering the amount of football he played and the career points he has, he kind of falls in line with this question, because personally, he needs to take a step forward to bounce back and give himself a shot for moving ahead with his career.
Also, there's guys on this list that don't feel like older guys, but Devon Ellis is listed as a redshirt junior. I would have gotten that bet wrong. I would have thought he was still a redshirt sophomore. You've got other guys. If you're a Penn State fan and you want to will an answer into existence, Caden Wallace is the guy that you want to take a step forward this year. You need to take a step forward this year. He's a redshirt junior as well. So there's a lot of guys that need it. And unfortunately, it keeps coming back to the offensive line for us this offseason. And I don't know that there's a ton of guys that you can look to as veteran guys that, could take that step and fill that gap.
All right, veteran guys, doesn't get more veteran than the centerpiece of our final question. We went with 3 mailbag questions today. We appreciate you sending them our way. Continue to do so on Apple Podcasts. Drop your 5-star rating and review. Hop into the 5-star mailbag. Sean, not counting injury, what would it take for Sean Clifford to end up on the sideline next season?
I don't like this question. Yeah, I mean, it's gonna. I think it would be bad. I mean, you're not going to want to hear that he's going to have or the job taken from him in camp or anything like that, because I don't see that one happening, especially going on the road against a Big Ten opponent to open the season. So yeah, it would take. I don't want to say a complete implosion, because you've got less slack, or he's got less line to work with this year because of who's behind him. You got a little bit of experience in Vayu, and you got some talent in Aller and Prabula. But yeah, I think it's going to take some poor performances, stringing some poor performances together, and just not looking comfortable. I mean, obviously last year, his first year in a new offense, and his third straight year in a different offense. So maybe you give him a little leeway last year, but I mean, he wasn't half bad over the first half of the season. Then he took that hit against Iowa, and all bets were off. So you got to see which Clifford is out there, and this is not a scenario that I see him being pulled because of he throws a couple incompletions in a row or something like that. I think it would take something fairly drastic for that to happen in game. And injury aside, Clifford has been banged up at times in his career, and you certainly don't wish that on anybody. But injuries are a real factor here, and luckily Penn State as a room is in a better position to deal with it this year than they were last year.
And even when injuries have been a factor, going back to McSorley, Franklin hasn't always made the decision to go with the next guy and put him in the lineup. And in fact, performance-based benchings, the only one I can think of the Franklin tenure is on the road at Nebraska as Penn State stumbled its way to another loss, benching Clifford. They played Iowa at home the next week, in 2020, and Will Levis was the guy for one half, and he benched Levis. So that didn't last long. So there isn't any kind of track record here. We've talked about that fiercely loyal tag that goes on to Franklin, the way he handles some things, and he says it himself, and he doesn't want to shake his quarterback's confidence. But we're at the stage now where Sean Clifford's 24 years old before kickoff, and you cannot live and die by the what version of Sean Clifford will we get this Saturday mantra.
I agree. Yeah.
The question there is, unlike last year, do you assess the practice field and say that guy can do it better than Sean? That guy might be able to do it better than Sean, because clearly when they looked around the practice field, they did not find that.
Yeah,
and they didn't really have that in 2020 either. And Will Levis is now in Kentucky doing what he did, but I don't think that's how he was evaluated by this coaching staff either. Do they have that guy? Does he emerge in the spring? Does he emerge in August? Does he emerge in September? Because that's the other part of this. Does the staff realize that even if Sean Clifford's out there playing good football, and it's not really bad Sean Clifford, maybe it's not the greatest Sean Clifford that we've seen, but it's not benchable Sean Clifford. But if you've got a young quarterback on the practice field in your scrimmages doing things that maybe Sean Clifford isn't capable of, and there's a different kind of ceiling in place there, how much are you willing to open that door? Because that's the other side of the equation, where someone just comes up and pushes for that job rather than Sean Clifford falling back and losing the job. That's the side of the coin that I think it's just very hard to project at this point. And I'm curious about how the staff will truly evaluate that, and if they'd be willing to make that kind of a proactive move before Sean Clifford were to give them a reason to get the hook.
Yeah, that's only really happened once, and that was an injury. That's when Sean Clifford got the job from Tommy Stevens, who missed that spring, and then Clifford came out and sort of performed well enough to be named. I don't know if he was named the starter at the end of the spring or what the deal was, but yeah, that's
the week before the opener. But I think we all knew it was coming. Yeah,
right. Okay, so that's a difficult look, and Clifford is expected to be out there playing, so it's a little bit different situation than Tommy, who was in a boot that spring. So yeah, man, the question is not what we think, it's what do we think that they think, and that's a dangerous game when you're trying to play in a college football coach's head, especially one that's been around and been loyal and been comfortable. I think loyalty is probably the wrong word. I think the comfort level is more of a thing when you throw him out there and what he's going to or what to expect, and you think what he's going to do. I think that's probably a little bit higher than loyalty in this situation.
Something that, as referenced before, we'll be keeping tabs on day by day by day and month by month as this year goes on, that quarterback room. That's going to do it for this episode. Thanks again for all the mailbag support. Sean with the quick change, lifelong Commanders fan showing up the jersey. All NFL teams back to 0-0 today. Congrats again to Haley and Scott for those championship rings that are coming their way in the next couple of months. Thanks to our producer, Lance Glenn. We'll be back with another episode later this week. It's the Lions 247 Podcast.